and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. A report released last August by the UN Human Rights Office found that China had committed serious human rights violations in Xinjiang. The report cited credible evidence of torture, forced fertility controls that have led to a dramatic drop in the birth rate, and the violent suppression of Uyghur culture and faith. Now, to better understand the repression of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, joining me on the show is Nurmuhammad Majid. He is chairperson of the East Turkistan Human Rights Watch Association that's based in Istanbul. Mr. Nurmuhammad, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me today.
Tell me a bit about why you are here in Malaysia today, and who do you represent, and what are you trying to inform us of?
First of all, thank you for having me for the show. This is Nurmuhammad Majid, representing the East Turkestan Human Rights Watch Association based in Turkey. And I came along with a delegation from the International Union of the East Turkestan NGOs, also based in Istanbul, Turkey. The primary purpose of our travel this time is to negotiate with the Malaysian politicians to engage for a purpose of a parliamentary friendship group for the Uyghur cause or advocacy network. And secondly is we are also proposing to establish an NGO based on the current abhorric situations in our country. So to raise awareness to the Malaysian public and to get connected to the Malaysian institutions and to get influenced by the Malaysian politicians.
Okay.
The third aim is to establish a wide network with our partner NGOs in Malaysia through our personal experiences and also representing the nation of Uyghurs. For the last 74 years' time, Chinese government has been implementing immense level of crackdown or atrocities which meant to be a genocide proven by the Western countries and a number of parliaments of the Western countries.
Did you say 24 years?
74 years.
74 years.
It is. 74 years Chinese government occupied our country and has been implementing an inhumane policies in our country against our people, which today's the Western world has formally recognized the atrocity as means of genocide. Although that Malaysia has not recognized this terminology genocide, but Malaysian politicians in the past have mentioned the human rights violations committed by the Chinese government against the Uyghur people. Hence, we have seen that Malaysia is another fertile atmosphere to raise awareness and increase our connectedness, and plus that after the new elections in Malaysia, at the right time, the country is talking about Islamophobia. On this Monday, I attended the International Conference on Islamophobia and tackling how to address this matter according to the Malaysian Madani concept. And this gives us another strength that, actually the country is able or capable of delivering some of the awareness campaign of the Uyghurs in Malaysia, plus that take some actions from the perspective of the human rights, from the perspective of the religious rights and social rights of our people, right, to get some support network in this country.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about how long the repression has been going on. What is it like in 2023? I'm just wondering about how the situation has evolved over time. Can you give us a sense of that?
Of course. In 1949, at the end of the Second World War, China was dealing with the war-winning countries, which is the formation of the United Nations, 5 major countries. And then our country was given to China, allocated to the Chinese administrative system. After that once, for some years, China has maintained relatively peaceful negotiation with our local government. However, since 1960s, they started their real nature, ambition to change this region into a totally Sinified territory, and they have started attacking our the elite group, the business people, the religious leaders, and our high-class social system. And by the end of 1980s, Chinese government has successfully secured the the total administrative system mechanism in East Turkestan by installing millions of military and semi-military forces, by taking all the resourceful areas such as natural gas, oil, petroleum, coal, mining or gold areas. Also by occupying the fertile, most resourceful lands for the use of the Han Chinese settlers over the time. But in 1990s, we know that there is a campaign in the Western countries against war and terrorism. Then China has taken this as a green light for them to start attacking on our population for the primary purpose of religious persecution and ethnic discrimination. The level of atrocities that time is not really known to the Western world or the outside of world because of the media restrictions or by the government control. However, since 2009, through an unrest or crackdown policy of the Chinese government against the students in the capital city of Urumqi, then the Western media or the outside of world is starting to pay much more closer attention to the situation of the Uyghurs. Then the Western countries have started to implement some of the supporting mechanism to accept some Uyghur refugees to be settled in the European countries, and also allowing the NGO or the international community sector to negotiate or to raise this matter to the Chinese counterparts. But China has always denied the existence of such suppression policy committed by the Chinese government level, societal level, and the public institutional level. But in 2015, China has launched another major crackdown by detaining Uyghur and other Muslim groups in East Turkestan by mass.
Yeah, so those are the photos of the detention centers that we see, the satellite photos.
Indeed. The international communities has increased the alarming attention on this matter, because this is not only just an anecdotal story, rather by satellite imagery, by the investigative journalists, by the countries and by the leaders of that countries, put much more attention on the real situation that Uyghurs are suffering. Then in 2017, the Chinese government cannot hide more about the detention facilities, but just they gave a just fabricated name called "We are engaging a re-education process for the people who are radicalized, exterminated, or being violent in this region."
Right.
But there is a counter narratives from the Western countries. That's why Canada, United States, England, and 10 more other countries' parliaments have formally recognized the atrocities as genocide happening to the Uyghur people. Last August, the United Nations High Commission for the Human Rights Commissions, they also produced a credible report to state that the atrocity or the crimes committed by the Chinese government against the Uyghur people could mount to crimes against humanity. But without referring to the genocide, that report details the severity of the crackdown policy of the Chinese government, the universality of this matter to the whole global society, and also the gravity of such persecution policies carried out by a state against a particular nation.
Okay, so I want to come back to the issue of what you brought up, the narratives and the counter-narratives. We'll come to that and how that's playing out in a global stage. But what is, to your understanding, China's motivation here, China's end goal? What do we know about what they want to achieve in Xinjiang?
In one sentence, China officially called this process is Changjiuzhian in Chinese, which literally translates as permanent control of the region. Permanent control, not only the sense of the administrative level of control, government level of control, rather is controlling the thoughts, minds, hearts of the people as well, controlling all the resources, controlling all the aspirations of the local Uyghur people for a free society, for a sovereign nations, because we have successfully installed 2 republican system statehood in the first part of the 20th century. far before Chinese came, we were prosperous nations, we were resourceful nation, we are welcoming nation, friendly nation, who made significant contribution to the regional area, plus that the global civilizations. China did not want us to become a noticeable nations who can influence the surrounding areas. That's why, through their crackdown policies, they want to make an ultimate control of the region to achieve their political ambition to have China is more strong in the sense of Central Asian region, which is the similar people who are practicing the same faith and the cultural identity with us. The secondly is the economic dimensions. China is reaching the Central Asia, Middle East, Africa by the project called BRI, Belt and Road Initiatives. And the majority of the projects who connect this, the BRI project, from China to the Middle East, Central Asia or African region or East European region is actually our country, East Turkistan. That's why they want to have a complete control of these economic dimensions.
The Belt Road Initiative passes through
Yes,
Turkistan?
3 of the major routes passes through East Turkestan. One from the north connects to Russia and the Kazakhstan, one in the center through Korla to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, and another is in the south to Pakistan. That's why China is taking this matter is so rigidly, is continuously is implementing the abusive practices which amounts to genocide, continuously harassing the people. Melissa, I'll give you an example. Detentions of the millions of civilians who served for the Chinese institutions, who were loyal to the Chinese government system and who has been contributing to the Chinese economy, suddenly in 1 year time they become radicals. And then they were massively detained in the concentration camps by disconnecting their rights, disconnecting their connections, and their families has been completely torn apart. Then they sending the minders, the watchers to the families of the Muslims, monitor their daily activities 24/7, reporting them in the streets, in the community, in the families to the top level administrative or the state security department, surveillance system. Then enforced every single Uyghur citizens to install spyware on their mobile phones, make sure that they were controlled or monitored. Then there came a credible report in 2021 in February by the BBC report that women are sexually assaulted, sterilized, or taken other means of abusive practices by the Chinese government apparatus, by the inmates in the prison or detention facilities, which is beyond comprehension. And also at the same time, all around the cities, once upon a time, there was a very active hub of the social cohesions, the economic progress, and the academic achievements. Whole area is completely destroyed. Also at the same time, more than 16,000 worship places are destroyed or closed by force by the Chinese government.
How has the international community reacted to these revelations? You said that there's a narrative coming out from the Western world, all these investigative reports that are coming out. But what about the rest of the world? I mean, I know a lot of countries are closely linked to China for economic and financial aid. How is it being suppressed for so long?
So I'll give you a short explanation. United Nations has 193 member states, but in the past 5 years' time, we have seen only the maximum 50 member states have been condemning or somehow is putting pressure on the Chinese government on this alarming matter. The rest, which is 140 or about 140 countries, are either just neglecting the case or opposing the other narrative, counter-narrative, but supporting the Chinese narratives. And because of the economic ties of China with the third world, especially with the developing countries, Arab countries, and also the small nations which is around China, they are too afraid to talk about this matter with the Chinese government. But to be honestly, any country, or either small country like Nepal, like Malaysia, Singapore or Qatar or Yemen, any country should have a reason to speak up for this universal, global and alarming human rights violation committed by the Chinese government. Because if you take the whole matter as a circle, and the circle has a 360 degree, our cause can be fit into any degree of the circle. Any degree, apart from the political struggle, we have the violations of the social rights, violation of the economic rights, violation of the eco-social rights, violation of the academic rights, violation of the religious rights. All these areas, the people or the countries can take measures to deter Chinese oppression policies. However, we have seen less and less interest from the Muslim world,
Yes.
which is 2 billion population by number. They are unable to tackle or address this matter in a right way.
Well,
that's why, in the context of the Malaysian context, we are here to raise more awareness and recommending Malaysia to take some achievable or viable actions to deter Chinese violation policies, Chinese practices of Islamophobia against the Uyghur people, and the Chinese religious destructions to a Muslim region.
The Muslim world, many in the Muslim world have been very vocal about, in its defense of Palestinians, of the Rohingya. Why the silence and cautious tone adopted over what's happening with Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
The first reason is that, the influence of China, I would say.
For the Muslim world?
For the Muslim world, because China has been investing since 1985. That time is the starting of the diplomatic relationship with the major Arab or Muslim countries. Chinese government is giving a false narrative on the Uyghur issues, or they tend to hide the reality of the Uyghur Muslims or their contribution to the Islamic civilizations. They're just changing the directions and they're giving another narrative from the perspective of the Uyghur Muslims, which is the Chinese Muslims living in China. That's why the Muslim or Arab countries are paying much more attention to the Uyghur Muslims' welfare living in different parts of China, and then tend to forget or neglect what is the situation about the Uyghur Muslims, who has been the stronghold of the East for the last 1,000 years. Another second reason that these countries, the Arab or Muslim countries, which is the member of the Organization for Islamic Conference, or OIC member countries, have either they have no strong strengths to deter Chinese aggression policies against the Uyghur people, or in their own jurisdictions, they have much more human rights violation practices in their system. Another reason is, I would say softly, majority of the public of the Muslim countries are unaware of the situation. Unaware the situation because of the government restrictions of media and the government false descriptions of the Chinese narratives, etc. And plus that Chinese propaganda missions in these countries by mass investment, media investment, political influence, corruption, and also social distractions methodologies carried out by China is far more suppressed. And people are addicted to listen what China says, because the countries are having more economic ties today with China compared to the United States.
Right. What, do you also think the anti-American, anti-Western sentiment plays into this?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for reminding me. We're just talking about that one. See, recently, the Arab and the Muslim countries having more economic, political, or social ties with China and Russia than America or the West. Because what they see is West is an ideological enemy of the Arab countries who have demonized the rights of the Muslims in their respective territories. However, if you, by comparison, the Chinese practices of the debt trap policies by investing their funds into the Arab or Muslim countries, by misleading the political institutions with false narratives, then they are also misguided. By comparison, the damage that the China is giving to the Muslim countries is going to be far superior than the United States has carried out to the Muslim countries so far.
Mr. Nurmuhammad, how do you think this crisis, the atrocities, the persecution will resolve? What is needed? I mean, it's been happening for so many years. How do you think it will play out?
Firstly, we need to imply a multidimensional level of support mechanism. At the international level, the countries who are members for the United Nations must first acknowledge that report produced by the United Nations. We don't go beyond for our political aspiration for our sovereign nations, but to understand the real situation of this 30 million populated, 2 million square kilometer land to gain basic human rights, fundamental rights, and those rights which is described by the Chinese constitutions and the constitutions or other norms that has been drafted in China to protect the rights of these autonomous regions. China calls us as Uyghur Autonomous Region, but in reality there is nothing the autonomous, the rules or the other obligations were granted to us. The second level, at the countries at their own jurisdictions, yes, China is describing this matter as an internal matter. Of course, we have no problem with that. But Chinese practice or violence or genocide policies committed on the Uyghur people is no longer an internal matter because this is relevant to the whole humanity. Yeah. In 1940s, we have said no to the Holocaust. In Rohingya crisis, the world has stood up and condemned Myanmar's actions. And the Palestinian matter is going through 75 years without a stop. The whole international community is taking decisive actions, continuous effort to protect and promote the rights of the Palestinians. Our cause has no difference from this. That's why countries need to understand the real nature of this cause and the global nobility of this cause, plus that the severity, the gravity, and also the harshness of the persecution and the crimes against humanity that China is doing, particularly against our nation.
So you mentioned at the start of our conversation 3 reasons why you're here in Malaysia today. What can Malaysia do to help end crimes against Uyghurs?
This is the continuation part, how the outside of world can do. Take from the Malaysia as an example. Malaysia first is a democratic country based on the value of freedom, friendship, compassion, and the multi-ethnic basis. And a perfect example of harmonious society, successful economy, and stable government. That's why Malaysia can take, firstly, at the United Nations and the other international forums, using its reputable influence or reputations to advocate for the rights of the Uyghur Muslims. Because the people who are suffering are actually the Muslims. We have rights because we have rights to mention the matter from the religious perspective, community perspective, social perspective, and the gender perspective. And the rights of the children perspective. Because if I say more than 500,000 children of the Uyghur community members are being apostated by force by the Chinese government, this should be a common or collective interest of the Muslim Ummah or the country leaders who are like-minded, conscious, and devoted for the protections of the rights of the Ummah. That's why Malaysia is government level, we can do a lot. And Malaysia is also a member of OIC and ASEAN. And the both charter describes that the member countries has obligation to protect the human rights and described in the Universal Rights of the Human Rights Declarations in 1948. That's why they need to take some obligations to carry out some practices based on the principle they are adopted. Also, at the institutional level, Malaysia is a Muslim majority country. Malaysia is hosting so many masjid or religious places, just giving total freedom for the Muslim communities for a practice of religion, promoting the religious activities, religious rights. But they need to look into the situation in East Turkestan, how 16,000 masjids were destroyed in the last 5 years' time. This is shocking. Some masjids actually has 700 years of history. Historical connection has been cut, religious practice has been cut, religious connection has been cut. That's why Malaysian religious institutions or other institutions should take a decisive action to protect the rights of the Muslims of East Turkestan. But not not last but not least, the people of Malaysia or general public can do something. We have three major ethnic groups, which is Malay, Chinese, Hindus, and plus that other, the Muslim population in this country. All of them can take a small or bigger initiatives to protect or promote the Uyghur rights, because we are living in a country where that every citizen's rights are protected and promoted by law, by institution, and by mutual respect. But why on earth that in the corner of that world, which is in East Turkistan, that particular group called Uyghur Muslims are unable to practice their basic rights, unable to go to the masjid, unable to give a Muslim name to their children, unable to protect the dignity of the woman according to the religious belief. This is a matter of global concern.
Right.
This is not only an internal matter that China is fighting against terrorism. You cannot define one whole nation as under the explanation of terrorism, violation, or radicalizations, because I mentioned that our people have been contributing to the Chinese economy immensely.
Right. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I appreciate you taking time out of here to meet with me.
Thank you so much for your help.
That was my conversation with Nurmuhammad Majid, the chairman of East Turkestan Human Rights Watch Association based in Istanbul. That wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.